Hey, Bomb Squad. If you're a comedian or a podcaster looking for an affordable website solution with a modern look, then we recommend Puck's Hub. With a Puck's Hub website, you can set up your new website in minutes with easy-to-use pre-built templates. Puck's Hub websites are customizable and can easily be integrated with other platforms like Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter. The best part? Puck's Hub plans are only $5 per month. We use Puck's Hub for our website at the Art of Bombing podcast, and we think you should too. That's why we've partnered with Puck's Hub to offer listeners a free 60-day trial. Head over to puckshub.com to subscribe and use promo code AOBPOD at checkout for your 60-day free trial, and then pay only $5 per month after that. Take your career to the next level with your own Puck's Hub website today.
Dan Bublitz Comedy Productions.
My friend Dan, he's got a podcast, 'cause all comics need a podcast, and nobody had a podcast called The Art of Bombing. So Dan went out and bought a tape deck. Who knows why he bought a tape deck? Podcasts don't get played on tape decks, but Dan is from the 80s. So hey there, all you funny jerks, come talk to Dan about your work. Tell him all about your worst times. It's The Art of Bombing.
Welcome to the Art of Bombing presents Between Bombs Callbacks, where me, your host, Dan Bublitz Jr., and my co-host, Mr. Josh Shirley, call back the most recent episode. This week, we are calling back episode 271 with Billie Jo Gillispie. How are you doing, Josh?
Pretty good, and I'm impressed with Billie Jo Gillispie. She's got a lot going. She has a lot of range as a person. I mean, ex-Marine. Tough as nails. You got to be an elite warrior to just make it through training for Marines. Then,
oh, absolutely, and she's a delight to be around.
And then she goes and does something even harder: stand-up comedy.
Right? And like, how can we make life worse? Let's do stand-up comedy.
All right, let's find something with probably a worse failure rate. No, I thought she brought up some really juicy topics that you guys went on about that I thought were worth calling back here. One of those things, just the idea that we have to own it as comics, right? Isn't there like a just prevailing idea out there that if something goes wrong, it's the audience's fault?
Yep. And
right.
I mean, a lot of comics, especially professional comics, will say that you should never blame the audience, which I agree with about 99.5% of the time. I'm sure you've probably discovered this as well, or encountered this, where there's like that 0.5% where nobody on the show is doing well, even though they should be. And it's like, so there's just like a weird energy, and maybe it's not the audience per se, but if everybody goes up, unless they're, it's an open mic or something like that, but you have like straight up killers and nobody's getting a good response, then sometimes I feel like that's probably more on the audience than it is all the comedians. But again, 99.5% of the time, it's us. It's our responsibility, and it's not necessarily. It's our responsibility, but it's not necessarily our fault. What we've discovered, especially on this podcast, talking with other comedians about their bombing stories, is a lot of times it has to do with experience and not having the tools in the tool set. So you're, early on. I mean, the first time that I had a major bomb that inspired this podcast, I didn't have the appropriate tools to handle the situation that I was in. And I take accountability for that. That's my fault. I never blame the audience on that, but I just didn't have the skills. And that's what happens a lot of times. But you still have to, like you said, you have to have that accountability. You have to be able to own that and recognize that, because you can't just, if you're doing a terrible job, it's not the audience's fault.
Right. Do you have a process of evaluation that you go through when you're thinking back on a set to determine that? Like you just mentioned, hey, sometimes if we all know what we're doing, it's a professional lineup and everybody's eating shit. Something's going on in the room. There are some circumstances outside of our control potentially that are contributing to this. And as a comic, I resonate with that situation. But how do you go through and find those areas where you have to go, okay, that was me. I need to get better, or this is something I can use?
Well, I think part of it, when it's a situation where it's just you, it's a lot easier to like really hone in on that. You know what I mean? Like if you have a bad show, because then you can go back and you can analyze your performance, but you can also, if you're recording, that's one thing, that's why it's important to record. You can go back to the recording and kind of see what happened. When it's a situation where it's a whole group, it's a little harder because you're only going to be able to go back to what you recorded, not necessarily anything up. And if you're not in the room for the whole show, you don't know. I mean, one thing that in a situation like that could be is something happened before the show even started, and all the comics are in the green room hanging out, and they don't even know that maybe, a group of people got upset about an order or something with the venue, and so now they're angry. And now all the comics, they don't know this. They're not aware of it. They just go up and they're trying to do their thing. And the audience is just like, well, we're not interested because now we're mad at the staff. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, and there's no way to really go back and figure that out. All you can do is just try to analyze what I mean, take the information that you have and try to process that to see if you can figure that out. I mean, Again, it's a lot easier if it's, a one-on-one situation. And even sometimes you can't figure that out right away. I mean, honestly, the bomb that I was talking about, it took me probably a couple of years before I realized what really happened. Like I would think about it and dwell on it, and I listen to the recording and stuff, but until I had more experience, I couldn't actually realize that was what I was missing because I didn't have it yet. So it's a weird catch-22. It's like you got to have that experience, but if you don't experience, and that's why bombing is important, and looking at those bad shows, because you learn from it. And after that event, I had more experience, and now if I went and did that event in the same circumstances, I bet you my performance, I don't think I would have got the best performance out of it just because of the circumstances, but I would have been able to perform a little bit better and make it a better situation.
Yeah. I think it's just a factor of being objective, or maybe waiting enough time before you go back and listen to the recordings, or before you try to find out what went wrong.
Yeah.
You give it a little time for the emotional reaction to wear off.
Mm-hmm.
Get it out of your system, vent when you need to, but then objectively revisit it so that when you're doing so with an open mind, you're going to find some things that are within your control that you can do better. And then that same objective sensibility is going to wake you up to things like the example you gave, the checks dropping at a weird time, the mic not being loud enough, the other external factor, everybody else bombed.
Mic cable isn't working right.
Yeah, it's cutting out, and they didn't understand what I said at all. Like all those factors are going to combine together in every performance, good or bad. So I think I think what we learned from Billie Jo, let's keep an open mind. Let's be vulnerable to the possibility that we could control some of it, and try to find those things and fix them.
Yeah, absolutely. And with that, part of that is you got to have, at some level, you have to have some source of self-awareness. I mean, not only do you have to look at your stuff objectively, but you got to be somewhat self-aware to realize, oh, I'm going to make mistakes. And then you have to, follow that up with, and that's okay, because now I can look at my mistakes objectively and improve to figure, and so then the next time I perform, or I'm in a situation similar to this, I'm going to make it a lot better, because now I I went back and processed and did all the things I need to do. And now I'm a better performer for it.
Yeah. And along the same line, she brings up the idea, and she was using Jackie Cation as an example, somebody who's been on this show. We both know who she is. And saying, look, because there were these extenuating circumstances beyond our control, that produced an exceptionally small audience for these comics.
Yep.
But they still came out and gave everything to the show. Nobody, like, as if they were performing at Carnegie Hall on TV. They still brought it. And there's a level of professionalism that they can control. So that sounds like the kind of decision we're talking about here, right? Like, I can control what kind of performance I give to this audience by, coming at it from a professional lens. I'm being paid to do this. There's an audience. The people who showed up are not going to get punished for people who didn't, and they are going to get the show of my life, right? So I'm going to go in there and nail it. And so I thought that was interesting. Like, I wrote down, always bring your A game.
Yeah, absolutely. And I agree with that 100%. And even, I know I've been guilty of being that person who didn't bring their A game when it was a small crowd, especially early on in my career. And that's why there's, and early on in my career, there were podcasts, but not as many as there are now. There's so many comedy podcasts out there where you can, get this information. So when you're a new comic, you don't have to make these same mistakes, because there's plenty of comics out there sharing this insight. And that's, with me, I didn't have this kind of insight when I started. And so, and it's not to excuse the fact I'm fully responsible for being that comic and having that attitude. But now that I've been doing it a lot longer, anytime, it doesn't matter if it's a paying audience and they're there for comedy, I want to try to give them the best show that I can. And
that's right.
It's even become a big pet peeve of mine when, you have these comics, a comic will come in, there'll be a small audience, and not only do they not give their best performance, they give a negative performance where they're in there and they're negging on the venue, they're negging on the producer, they're negging on the audience that's there, complaining about them being there and being a small audience. And it's like, wait a minute, they're actually here. Why are you harassing them? Be thankful. Those people actually came. If you want to neg somebody, neg the people that didn't come, be mad at the people that aren't there. Don't be mad at the people who are, and then take your frustration out on them, because then what, you end up getting into that territory where, one, it's going to be a bad show for them and it's going to be a bad experience for them. And then that leads us to the other territory that you get into, is that now these people have had a bad experience with comedy, and there's a good chance they'll never come back to a comedy show again, not just at this venue, but period. You've ruined comedy for them altogether. And we're already in an industry where, there isn't, people don't go to comedy shows on a regular basis. There isn't a big percentage of people who fall into that category of, I'm a comedy fan, I'm going to every show that I can. Usually a person will go to like one comedy show in their entire life. Yeah. And, and then that'll be it. And unless it's good, then that might, if get them to then want to be a comedy fan. And that's where the opposite comes in. If you're, it doesn't, going back to what you said, where it doesn't matter the size of the audience, you should always bring your A game. And that's important, because you could have a situation like this where it's a small crowd, it's their first time ever at a comedy show, and the whole show is just phenomenal. And now they're like, I want to go to every comedy show. And now you've taken somebody who'd never experienced comedy, put them in the situation that isn't necessarily good for comedy, made it a good comedy show, and now they're going to be thrilled to go check out more comedy. So you had the opposite effect. So it's real important. Think about that.
Right. I think there's some misdirected sort of energy, especially from newer comics, that I see when that situation where they see a small room. And I think they think, well, it's healthy for me to call out what I'm seeing, which is a small room. We're all in it together. So let's all unite at that point and turn this into something. But they're missing a key component, that it's not the audience's
The
fault, which you
tools.
said, right?
And also they don't have the tools to make it.
Right.
There are comics that can go into that situation, that scenario that you're talking about, and totally destroy that room.
Yeah, but by starting with the truth, but not going negative with it.
Yeah.
This is your fault, or the venue. Like, you gave all these great examples of that. And not, and this came up on the episode as well. And I thought it's particularly touches on something you and I have both talked about and experienced together in the past, which is, okay, we don't have the audience we thought we were going to get. So let's wait 30 minutes to start the show, or like bring your A game to the production as well. So that, people who came to see it are watching the show when it's supposed to start.
I'm laughing very hysterically because this is something where we kind of disagree on a little bit. I'm all in favor of like starting the show on time or as close to the beginning as possible, but I do like giving a little bit of leeway, especially only in the situation where, not if you're hoping people show up, but if you know that you sold tickets and they haven't.
That's right.
In.
And I know the episode. Yeah. So So for backfilling, Dan and I have done a couple shows together. On one of them, we had Dan was in with a local headliner, and the headliner, wasn't happy with the number of people that were there, and just decided, look, hey, let's start it at 8:30. It's 8 o'clock. Yeah. The only people who are going to come are there, and they're ready to go. It's 8:05. Let's wait till 8:30 to see if maybe one more person stumbles into the room. And that didn't happen. And then the people who were there to watch the show got started. Like, the show started half an hour late for them. And when he went on, they left. That was number one. Number two.
And I agree with that. That in that scenario, you maybe hold for a few minutes, but not that long. Only a few. Sure. But
that's right. And I was in the second example, I was definitely self-righteous, like, we got to start it on time. It doesn't matter. But lo and behold, I had, 6 people or so who had bought tickets who weren't there yet. And so Dan's over my shoulder like, what should we do here? Should we wait and not start exactly on time, Josh? And I was like, shut up.
And what the most important part of that part of the story, though, is, did they show up?
I don't remember, actually.
I don't either.
But we made the right call. Like, we didn't. But... Yeah, we didn't. We didn't wait 30 minutes. We waited 5.
Exactly,
maybe 10. And said, okay,
that's
let's give
what I think. You give like a 10-minute grace period on a situation like that, even in a situation where you're hoping more people show up, and you have no idea if there are. If you have a small group and you're hoping more people show up, maybe give a 10-minute grace period. But after that, you do have to get the show going, because, again, going back to your point, you have people that showed up for the show. They're waiting for the show. The longer it takes to start the show, the more frustrating they're getting. And not to mention, if doors are at 6 and your show's at 7 and these people come right at door time, now they've been sitting there for an hour. And if you wait another half hour, that's an hour and a half that they've been sitting waiting for this show. And they're just getting more, upset about it. And then that'll could possibly, potentially lead them to being a bad audience, because now they're frustrated.
Seen that for sure. I've seen it for sure when the host, producer, or whoever's responsibility it is isn't communicating that.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
If you don't go up and at least make an announcement, which we did at our show, hey, look, we're holding a few more minutes for people who signed up. The weather isn't good tonight, whatever the reasoning is, or there's a long line that's right by the audience for drinks, and we got to wait for that to die down so you can hear what we're saying. Like, just let the audience know.
And I was just going to add to that. That's a good point. Having that full transparency. Don't be afraid to, go up and make an announcement before the show starts and say, hey, we're going to be starting it. Even, I'll do that on a lot of my shows, even when I know that most people are there. If I'm starting, I might go up 5 minutes before the actual start time and say, hey, we're starting in 5 minutes. If you want to go use the restroom, get a drink, this is the time to do it. Right. Or, if you're waiting, same situation where if there's people lined getting drinks, you're say, hey, we're just going to hold a few minutes while people finish getting the drinks, and then we'll get the show started. People will appreciate that transparency for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that definitely goes with taking accountability. You can admit that you have to start late.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, you're being accountable to the audience in a way there. That's a nice bow to put on this topic.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And and we'll, because we've already been at this for a little while, and we'll kind of go into this topic, and it's kind of the same thing, talking about being, charging for your worth. That was another thing we kind of talked about, because that is important too. You have to know your worth and charge accordingly. And that means if you're a new comic and you've got 5 minutes, you can't go expect hundreds of dollars for your 5 minutes, and or to pretend that you're a headliner or whatever. You have to be and it's hard to figure out rates and stuff. But you have to, there's a happy medium where you got to, goes back to what we were talking about having accountability and being, having self-awareness to know, okay, this is where I am objectively as a comic. And say you're a feature, I'm a feature. These are the rates that I can be charging for my level of comedy right now. And I'm not going to charge less, or I'm not going to charge more, because you see that a lot where comics will, I've talked about it all the time. This is one of my biggest pet peeves is comics will take gigs for practically no money. They'll lose money because they think they need the stage time. Yes, you need stage time, but if you're in a bigger market anyway, you can do plenty of free stage time and not have to. I mean, you're already spending a ton of money on gas just within your metro area. You don't need to waste it on a real gig, because you're going to gain the same skills at those local shows that you would on the road. Granted, it is fun to get that experience, but you shouldn't put yourself out to do that. But then at the same time, I see where comics will overcharge, and then, and then it'll be a terrible show. And then now that venue will never do comedy. Just like going back to the audience, if you ruin it for the audience, they might not come back to another comedy show. It's the same for venues. If you overcharge for a show and then don't put on a show to that caliber of what you charged, they're going to be a disappointed customer. And then they're not going to do, not only are they not going to work with you, they're probably not going to work with anybody again. So now you've ruined a whole venue for the future for everybody.
Yeah. And I heard the conviction in Billie Jo's voice when she talked about this topic in particular. Fundraisers, doesn't matter. I pay the comics. I go do these shows and I get paid. If you're not paying, or you think this is free, or that I'm not a professional, well, I'm not coming and I'm not doing that gig, and I'm going to say no. And I think, she's on a path to having a belief that says something like, look, and this is, I don't know what she charges or her numbers, and I'm not giving her advice. I'm just saying she's on a path to a place where she can say to herself and establish a belief, I'm worth $600. One night, I'm going to come. I'm going to fill your bar up. I'm going to make everybody laugh. I might bring a couple of people with me. I might not, but I'm good for an hour and 10 minutes of comedy. It's going to be free. It's going to be entertainment that they can't get anywhere else. And I'm also going to provide all the BS consulting that I have to provide a venue that's an alt room and not a comedy club that doesn't really know how to put shows on, about where to put the lights and what to turn on and what to turn off, and how to face the chairs all in the same direction, and how not to have the stage right in front of the door, and all these different things that we take for granted that people know that they don't, that we have to be an advisor and a professional in. And her belief is, you know what, that's worth $500 or $600.
Yep.
And I'm going to miss out and say no to all the $50 proposals I get, and somebody else can go do those. But with 12 of those, I say no to. I say one to the 600, and I've just basically cleared my calendar to do other things and made a profit.
Yeah, absolutely. I was just going to say, and we touch a lot on that in the Between Bombs, how to produce your own comedy show. We did that 3-part series. We did one episode that was, just talking about trying to figure out your quoting and stuff like that, where we really went in deep on why are you charging this, because that's what the response you're going to get, and being able to say, hey, well, you're not just paying me for my comp, you're paying me for my experience, you're paying me for my consulting, you're paying me for running the door or whatever you agree to do with your show. That's what they're paying for. It's not just for you to come tell jokes for 45 minutes or whatever. So, exactly. But there are obviously cases where that is where you're just getting paid for, if you're working at like a comedy club or whatever, and again, you have to look at, knowing there's a big difference between knowing your worth and versus not doing any shows at all for, knowing your worth and getting too egotistic about it. And you got to ride that line where, yes, you want to know your worth, you want to charge what you're worth, but there's some things where you have to put your ego aside and also look at the other factors and how it might benefit you. An example of that would be, you might get an opportunity to host at your local comedy club and it doesn't pay very good. You think your hosting might be worth X amount of dollars, but this is what that club pays. Are you going to skip out on it and then potentially ruin your relationship with that club? Hopefully not. Hopefully you'll be like, oh yeah, this is a good opportunity. I don't have to drive very far because it's in my hometown, and maybe it could lead to a lot more money. So you got to think about that too. What are you gaining? What's the investment, the return on investment, whether you're doing a free show or you're charging for it. So, but I think that's a lot to take in. That was a lot from that episode. And again, there's a lot more that we talk about with Billie Jo Gillispie in episode 271. Go back. If you haven't listened to it, go back and listen to it, and then come back and listen to this, because
we'll be right here,
then this will make way more sense. Some of the stuff we talk about. If you're this far.
We'll take a pause while you go listen to it. Hang on. Okay. Wait, let's give him a second, Dan.
You go listen to it right now.
Yeah, go ahead. And we're back. All right. How was that?
That was great. I'm glad you guys enjoyed that episode. All right. That's going to do it for this edition Between Bombs Callbacks, Calling Back episode 271. Thanks for listening. If you aren't already, make sure you subscribe to the podcast wherever you listen to it. Subscribe on YouTube. Do all the things, like, subscribe, follow, all the things that you need to do. And if, that's the best way to support the show. If you want to support us financially, you could throw a little tip in the coffee pot over at buymeacoffee.com/AOB pod. And we'll see you we'll be here on Monday with a brand new episode. And we'll see you then. Have a great week.
This has been a Dan Bublitz comedy production.